All right, thank you for joining, everyone. We will have President Hill kick us off, and we are ready to get started.
Good
afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to another session of Candid Conversations with Mayors. Today we have the honor of Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our June 17th, 2021 edition of Candid Conversations with Mayors. Today we have the pleasure of working with the REAL organization out of the National League of Cities, Race, Equity, and Leadership. Our conversations will be about redlining and housing equity. And so if you get an opportunity today, just go ahead and make sure that you join us in the chats as we begin to have discussions and participate. You're in for a special treat today. We also have with us Mayor John Daly as a part of our Candid Conversations, as well as Mayor Wayne Messam. And so we're going to turn it over right now to Real, and we will start our Candid Conversations.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and hello to everyone. My name is Shantae Byers. I'm currently the Senior Executive and Director for Member and Partner Engagement here at the National League of Cities. I am not the director of our REAL program. Our new director is with us today. However, I will be running the show, but soon you'll be hearing from Shauna Davey as we get down the line in the future. Melissa, you might want to check your screen. Before we move forward, we just want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. And so please, I want you guys to know that this is a learning environment. And we want you to be mindful of not only your own thoughts that you want to express in questions, but also the thoughts and expressions of your peers and their opinions as well. And please know that as we're talking, the goal is what you learn here leaves this room. In addition to that, we're going to ask you to please mute yourself when you are not speaking so that we won't distract from the conversation that will be had a little bit later, and also will not distract from the overall presentation that we'll be able to provide for you today. If you have any questions or any technical difficulties, we ask that you will please use the chat box, and then please turn off your camera. If you are not, if your connection seems to lag, or if you're trying to have you may be having any issues or challenges, turning off your camera may allow you to have better sound quality and still be able to see the picture in front of you. And again, if you have absolutely any questions, please place them in the chat box and we'll make sure that we get to them. We are extremely excited to be with you all today and to be able to take place in your candid conversations as it relates to redlining. And when we think about redlining, it oftentimes takes me back to when REAL first got started about 6 years ago. We got a phone call from the city of Ferguson due to the issue that happened there as it relates to the murder of Mike Brown. And we didn't have a whole lot to do, didn't know where to go or how we could help cities, but we made a decision in that moment that that will never happen again. And through our journey, we quickly realized that the issue of racial equity is far deeper than just community and police relations. It is systemic and it's institutional and expands across so many different issues, which is one of the reasons why we're excited to be able to talk to you all about redlining today. But that realization that this issue and challenge is a lot deeper helped us to craft our mission. And the mission of REAL, we believe wholeheartedly that we are here to build local leaders' knowledge and capacity to eliminate racial disparities, heal racial divisions, and build more equitable communities for all. In addition to that, it also was a catalyst for us to create our vision. And we truly believe that a nation, and we believe in a nation in which every local official is equipped to effectively lead and serve in an inclusive, thriving, and healthy community. We stand by that, which means that for us, every single tool, every single resource that we're able to create is going to be able to push both our mission and our vision. Next slide, please. And again, those resources and tools that we've created brings us to where REAL currently stands today. We believe wholeheartedly in training and building capacity for local leaders across the country and city staff. We put our efforts into really building technical assistance opportunities and helping you all to build networks as well as it relates to racial equity. And in addition to that, we have a ton of additional training resources, magazines, best practices as it relates to how do you push racial equity forward within your city on a whole host of different issues. In addition to that, we also believe wholeheartedly that although we are starting with the concept and the issue of race, we won't end there. Building out our portfolio of work to continue to work in and to provide opportunities for special populations is something that we do as well. And when you put all of that together, Real has had the opportunity to be able to touch so many different cities, towns, and villages within this country. From around 2017, once we actually really started to get our sea legs, we've had the opportunity to work with over 28 state municipal leagues, to work with nearly 400 cities across the country, and to train approximately 2,000 individuals within the United States. And that number grows on a daily and weekly basis. We were able to do that because of our theory of change. Here within the National League of Cities, we believe that change happens when people recognize three very core things. One, why the change is needed. Two, the potential of the proposed solutions. And three, a shared sense of urgency as it relates to that change that needs to take place. And because of this theory of change, that map that you were able to see has happened. In addition to our theory of change, we believe in one core national practice that we share with our partner, GARE. And that if we are able to help cities across this country, local elected officials and city staffs included, to be able to normalize racial equity, that means that they have the opportunity to create shared analysis of definitions, whether that be implicit and explicit bias, whether that means we are helping folks to understand the difference between individual, institutional, and systemic racism. And if it's the opportunity to be able to help people to understand the history of race within this country. We believe if we can do that in that normalizing phase, that provides us the opportunity to create a sense of urgency and an ability for cities to start to prioritize where they need to jump into the work, and for them to be able to understand how to have conversations about race with each other and their peers and their staff. If we can do that, we know that we can then move into the organizing phase. And that means that gives us the opportunity to be able to help folks to connect as it relates to what are your internal infrastructure look like? How do you start to then begin to think about the partners that surround and to organize them in an effort to do that last national practice, and that is to operationalize, to use racial equity tools and data, more specifically disaggregated data, in an effort to be able to drive strategies and create strategies that impact change. We believe wholeheartedly in this national practice as it relates to racial equity, and it is the core foundation of what we use to teach local elected officials across this country on what it means to push racial equity in order for them to create more equitable and holistic communities. It was super important for us to be able to give you a quick snapshot about Real. And although we won't go into detail as far as the services that we provide and the products that we're able to provide local elected officials and city staffs across the country, we at least wanted to give you a snapshot. And I am not going to be the only person that you're going to hear today. So my role was to kind of usher in and provide that normalizing or level setting of who we are as it relates to the Department of Race, Equity, and Leadership. But you'll be able to hear some amazing presenters today. Mr. Jared Bean, who is our Senior Program Specialist at the National League of Cities as it relates to training and working very directly with our state leagues. And Lauren Lowry, she is our Program Director on Housing and Community Development within the National League of Cities. And both of these individuals are absolutely amazing. And so I think when you put such a dream team together, I think that you are going to have an amazing experience and have the opportunity to go deeper and learn so much more as it relates to redlining. And with that being said, I am going to take a breath and pass this over to the amazing Mr. Jared Bean.
Hello, everyone. I am very pleased to be here today talking with you all, and we are going to move right along to the content, the context of housing segregation and redlining more specifically. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, before we do that, we like to first start our trainings by reviewing a few key American ideals and seeing how these measure up to reality. So this first one here is all men are created equal. This, of course, came from the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. That reads as follows: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, of course, this is authored by Thomas Jefferson, our third president, founding father. He was also a slave owner. He was the father of 6 children with a slave named Sally Hemings. Now, suffrage in the US has been very convoluted in our history, but for a significant period, most states only allowed free property owning men to vote. So not only was it just all white people, all white men, but property owning men. That falls far short of this initial ideal. And next up we have with liberty and justice for all. This is in the Pledge of Allegiance, formally adopted into Congress, adopted by Congress in 1942. Now, of course, Brown versus Board didn't end segregation in schools until 1954, and we didn't have the Civil Rights Act legally ending segregation until 1964 and the Voting Rights Act 1 year afterwards. And finally, government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. Now, this came from the Gettysburg Address by President Lincoln in 1863. Now, in 2017, a Pew Research poll showed that only 20% of Americans trust the government to do what is right. And this is because, by and large, that the government has not served all people to their benefit. We've seen slavery, we've seen Native American genocide, more recent rulings like Citizens United that have placed people very far on the back burner of what we profess our ideals are. Okay, proceeding along. We are now going to launch into Sticky History, which is a series of federal, state, and local historical points that reveal a more sordid history. Okay, next. We have these history points. They're broken down between quarters of the last century and a quarter century for the 2000s. So as I'm going through these, reading through these historical points, just guess where you think they fall, whether it's between 1900 and 1924, 1950, 1974, and so on. If you feel so inclined, you can drop your guesses into the chat. Just separate out each point by a comma or however you see fit. Okay. All right. So first up, we have the Federal Housing Administration redlining. The FHA determined that areas that were deemed fit for investment by banks and other financial service companies. Areas were physically demarcated with red shading on a map based primarily on assigned risk level associated with an area's racial composition. Next up, we have Grubstein versus Urban Renewal Agency of the City of Tampa. The Florida Supreme Court ruled that a slum can be taken by eminent domain and sold to private investors for the purpose of private renewal if these properties are within a designated urban renewal zone. Properties within renewal zones may be sold to private investors if the area is, quote, detrimental to public health and the community's general morality and welfare. Next up, we have the Federal Highway Act, Urban Renewal. This committed $25 billion for the construction of the interstate highway system. This legislation did not attribute for existing communities in the areas of desirable construction locations. Communities of color across the country where interstates would be constructed were displaced and or separated from local amenities, including schools, supermarkets, churches, and jobs, segregating whole communities. And finally, West Palm Beach Racial Zoning Ordinance. This enshrined a Blacks-only section of town, intentionally violating the Buchanan v. Worley Supreme Court decision that banned racial zoning 12 years prior. This ordinance remained in place until 1960. So that last one, you know that it's not later on in our history for the last century, but if you want to drop into the chat where you think it might be. And if you don't feel comfortable or you're just not sure, that's fine as well. I'm going to go ahead and advance along to the next slide to show you the dates. Okay, So this first one you see, the FHA redlining began in 1934. Grubstein versus the Urban Renewal Agency of the city of Tampa was in 1959. The Housing Act as part of the Fair New Deal was in 1949, and the West Palm Beach Racial Zoning Ordinance was in 1929. For that last one, it means that this ordinance was in place for 31 years after it was already deemed illegal to do so. Okay, we can go to the next slide. These are a few more points that I'll read out. And again, feel free to drop in the chat if you feel so inclined, or just, keep tally at home. Okay, the Griffin Park Housing Project was opened in this year. Housing many of the families displaced by the demolition of Jonestown, a Black neighborhood in Orlando. This development was intentionally targeted by city planners who had it surrounded by construction of Interstate 4. This has led to chronic health issues for residents caused by resulting air pollution. Next up, we have the GI Bill. This promised many benefits for returning service people, including low interest home loans. But the program structure prevented Black people from fully accessing these benefits. Most, including Black veterans, are left out of the post-war housing boom, a key source of wealth for white middle-class families. Next up, we have Smoky Hollow. This is a Black neighborhood in Tallahassee that was raised by referendum under the guise of urban renewal. Little was built in its place, and it became the site of Cascade Parks 50 years later. The families removed under eminent domain did not receive federal or local assistance for having their homes taken away. And finally, Euclid versus Ambler. Supreme Court decision that held that towns can use zoning to prohibit apartment buildings in single-family neighborhoods. This is a thinly veiled method of keeping African Americans out of white neighborhoods and greenlit similar zoning ordinances across the US. Okay. Give you a second to finalize your guesses, and we are going right along. All right, Griffin Park was opened in 1940, 2 years after the demolition of Jonestown, and over the preceding decades, these issues continued to prop up. The GI Bill was in 1944. Smoky Hollow was raised in 1960, and Euclid v. Ambler was in 1926. Okay, proceeding along. Okay, now we're going to go into what redlining is. It is a discriminatory practice of fencing off areas where banks would avoid investment based on the racial makeup of certain communities. And it proliferated in the 1930s under the New Deal's Homeowners Loan Corporation, which redlined maps for 239 cities across the country. And this was finally prohibited under the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The term redlining originates with actual red lines on maps that identified predominantly Black neighborhoods as hazardous. And it's important to note how redlining's proliferation and enduring legacy arose during the New Deal under FDR. While the New Deal was instrumental in pulling the US out of the Great Depression and in creating the middle class, it codified racist and exclusionary practices that systematically denied Black and other people of color from accessing programs that created the middle class and enabled generational wealth. So this, really highlights that even great policy, when it's done in a way such as this, can have extremely different consequences for the people that it's created to help and the people it's created to exclude. If we go further. This is an example of a redlining map in Florida. This one specifically is of Tampa, which was started in the 1930s. Tampa's redlining map included areas of Ybor City, Palmetto Beach, West Tampa, was known as Closed in Tampa Heights, and Port Tampa City. Now, what you can see here is, very clearly what's been demarcated as the hazardous areas versus the non-hazardous areas. And if you go into the descriptions of the maps as they were written back in the day, you begin to see how really just in your face the descriptions were. So the sections in red here were made up predominantly of Latino and Black residents. In the text of the map descriptions, it reads, Latins and Negroes occupy about We go to the following slide. Can you guys hear me? I'm saying that I have a
Yes, but you did go out for a second, Jared.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back over my last point and keep going, maybe with my video off. And if anybody can't hear me, or if I go out again, just let me know. So in this map of Tampa, or actually we're in Jacksonville now, I'm just going to truck right along. You can see the exact same thing happening. So in the red sections of Jacksonville, it is even more explicit what's going on. If I quote the description of the, okay, I'm starting my video back up. So you lost what red areas were labeled. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I apologize for my video over here and my connection. So these red line areas of Jacksonville, it's very clear what's going on with the red areas versus the green and the blue areas. If I quote the map description, it is occupied 100% by Negroes, except in the outlying portions where white are intermingled to the extent of about 25%. It also talks about so-called slum areas that are scattered throughout the entire Negro district. It goes on to outline the various issues that are in these neighborhoods, such as the lack of paved streets, sidewalks, drainage, sanitation facilities, and highlight high percentages of juvenile delinquency, infant mortality, and so on. It ends to say, the section has no particularly beneficial influences. We wanted to show you two different examples of this because it highlights the similarities that do so clearly exist in these redlining maps. In these cases, nearly all the redline areas correspond to a nearly total demographic makeup of Black and Brown residents, as well as a lack of improvements needed to ensure these neighborhoods could thrive in the future. And if we go along to the next slide. Okay, we're going back to Tampa. Comparison from then on the left in the 30s to now. The map on the right shows the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention 2018 Social Vulnerability Index scores for census tracts. This index is widely used to assess a community's capacity to prepare for, respond to, and recover from natural and human disasters. As you can see, these maps strongly resemble each other. This is a testament to the lasting implications of redlining and housing segregation in all its forms. Now, findings from a National Community Reinvestment Coalition study indicate that redlining is related to higher prevalences of poverty and greater overall social vulnerability, increased prevalence of poor mental health and lower life expectancy at birth, pre-existing conditions for heightened risk of morbidity, specifically in COVID-19 patients, but referring to asthma, diabetes, and so on, and lower life expectancy overall, an average of 3.6 years lower as compared to higher rated areas. Okay, go ahead. And that brings me to a question for everyone to ponder, to think about for yourself. If you care to drop an answer in the chat, feel free to do so. How is redlining and housing discrimination affecting your communities today? Where do you see this popping up? How do you see it popping up? I'll give a moment just to see if anybody wants to drop anything in the chat, and then I'll move right along. Going once? Okay. And go ahead and keep going. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So these are just a few examples of the legacy that redlining and other forms of housing segregation have for today, though it certainly is not an exhaustive list. We see this in the wealth gap. Homes in redline communities gained 52% less in equity, or around $212,000 less than green lighted communities. Black home ownership is 44% compared to 74% for white families. We see this in education because of the devaluation of public schools in redline communities due to funding through property taxes, which is the predominant way that schools are funded in this country. We see this in health because of the higher instances of chronic health conditions, including asthma and diabetes, lower access to healthy food, and more exposure to pollution from industries. We see it in climate even. In redline areas, can be an average of 10 degrees hotter than non-redline communities. And unfortunately, you see it in life expectancy. As I said in the previous slide, life expectancy in redline communities is on average 3.6 years lower than in non-redline communities. And if we keep going to the next slide, we will see an example of how housing discrimination has continued along, even in areas that were not redlined. I'll go ahead and play the video and we'll keep going.
All right, bear with me, you all. I have to share my audio and we will do this. We will share this in just a moment.
One home, two very different real estate appraisals, and a stark divide between black and white. This family's Ortega home jumped in value by 40% after they removed all signs of black culture from inside. They say this is living proof that people of color face a substantial wealth gap. On your side's Troy Kless joins us live tonight with their story.
Well, thank you. The family says that this home here to my right was initially valued at a price far below their expectations and far lower than other homes in this neighborhood. So they did an experiment, and they say the result demonstrates the literal cost of racial bias. The Ortega area with lush houses everywhere. Abena and Alex Horton say they wanted to refinance their mortgage. They say their first appraisal did not go well, far lower than their neighbors.
What's wrong? It's like, well, it's way under, this is just weird. So we're going to order another one. And, I obviously had a bunch of questions.
The bank scheduled a second appraisal. Horton made some interior changes.
So I thought that most likely it would make a difference if I took down the family pictures that we had in the home and, basically any markers that there were African Americans living in the house.
The difference between the first and second appraisal, $135,000.
Variance, and we just felt that, maybe it was outright incompetence, but it seemed like targeted incompetence, and it seemed like incompetence that to us was suspicious.
She is filing a complaint with HUD to see if there was a systematic undervaluing of her home. Horton says racial discrimination in housing has been under the table for far too long.
But I do think that if there is unconscious bias in the world, it's going to seep into the appraisal business, and it's going to impact Black wealth and Black generational wealth.
And the message that the Hortons want to share with others, if that they feel that something is off, then call someone. And they are contacting, again, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. You can find a link to where you can file a complaint if you feel you've experienced a similar issue in this story on firstcoastnews.com. Live in Ortega, Troy Kless, First Coast News on your side.
One home.
Okay, so this video is very stark, the realities of this family having to scrub all traces of Black culture from their house in order to get a proper home valuation. I want to call out again that this is a particular example of housing discrimination in a neighborhood, Ortega, that was not redlined. It was ranked as a Class A or a Class B neighborhood green or blue line neighborhood. And this instance demonstrates how stark inequities are even when all else might appear equal. Now, I want to shout out Abigail and Anne really quick for their comments in the chat. Abigail, I lived in West Palm Beach for 6 years. I think the most challenging aspect of redlining and associated sprawl is the transportation access difficulties. Impossible to live in many areas without a car. And that's very true. Transportation is one of the biggest issues when you talk about redlined areas because they were not thought of when improvements were being discussed for cities in general. And then, Anne, my community is a suburb. The concept was to flee urban areas. We had a very racially diverse sprinkling in our community. There are not very many economically depressed areas. And that's very astute as well. A lot of suburbs, most suburbs were planned due to white flight from cities. And that history continues to show through today. Now I see that we are on the question slide. So what actions do you want to see taken in order to combat the legacies of redlining? Again, you feel free to drop down in the chat anything that occurs to you. And it's okay if you are still chewing on this. I know that this is a lot of information. It's particularly fraught topic that there needs to be a lot to change. So I understand if you're still gnawing on a lot. Youth financial and real estate literacy. Thank you, Abigail. Okay, feel free to continue to drop in as we move along. I am going to pass this along to our Program Director for Housing and Community Development, Lauren Lowry, as she introduces and engages in conversation with a few mayors.
Thank you, Jared. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Lowry, Program Director for Housing and Community Development at National League of Cities. I will be moderating our conversation today, and I'm joined by Mayor and Florida League of City President Terrell Hill of the City of Palatka, Mayor Wayne Messam of the City of Maymar, and Mayor John Daly of the City of Tallahassee. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Daly and Mayor Messam, could you turn on your video, please? And then we can kick off this conversation. Okay. Thank you for joining me today for this timely and candid conversation, not only on redlining, but the effects of how federal, state, and local policies have exacerbated housing inequities over the decades. Jared has provided us for this conversation the historical context of redlining and laid out significant events over the years that not only occurred on the federal level, but on a state and local level. He also provided the residual effects of redlining. He highlighted the growing wealth gap between Black and white families, the devaluation of public schools in former redline communities, as well as health implications for individuals who are residing in these former communities. Although redlining no longer exists, it is still felt today in communities across the nation. And that leads me to our first question of this afternoon. Next slide, please. So my first question is, how do you think redlining has contributed to displacement, housing affordability, and housing instability found in your community today? And I'll also preface that, redlining may not have, a map may not have been made for your community, but it was potentially felt by urban renewal, as well as eminent domain. So I would love to see who wants to jump first at this question.
I'll go first. I think redlining in Palatka is definitely something that you can see on a map. In the mid 1800s, a community called Newtown was created, and it was created specifically for Blacks in the community. And Newtown basically encompassed the northern corridor of our community, with the line of demarcation being a street at that time, which was known as Lemon Street. As a result, even in today's time, what we see are low home values, what looks to be an intentional input of poverty within a specific district. So we've got about 10% of public housing of all our properties within the city are public housing. So in the 1960s, public housing was placed only in the Newtown areas. And we see a significant difference in home values. We see a significant difference in the values that we get for rents through Section 8 programs, market rate rents. And we're also seeing a significant input of poverty into the area, which the byproducts are crime and other issues.
Thank you, Mayor Hill. Mayor Daley.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Lauren, thanks for hosting, by the way. It's a pleasure to be here. And Mayor Hill, good to see you. And Wayne, good to see you too. And all of our friends at Florida League of Cities. Lauren, you do realize I worked for National League of Cities as a lobbyist for 5 years too, from 2000 to 2005. This is a homecoming for me, so it's good to see you.
Welcome home.
Yeah, but as a proud mayor of Tallahassee, Mayor Hill is absolutely correct. And you could probably have just about any mayor come on and share their personal story of their community and how redlining is impacted. Look, we went over the history earlier, and I'll just focus solely on the financial aspects of when we came out of the New Deal and the federal housing policies that were put in place. In particular, the Home Loan Act that was put in place, it significantly provided a barrier for people to be able to grab financing and to invest in certain areas of town. That was the whole reason why the redlining maps were created. And you are absolutely correct. It does not matter whether your municipality actually had a redline map created for it, or you were just impacted as another community. We all feel the impacts. So even to this day, we've made great strides in Tallahassee, but there are neighborhoods that are segregated. There are neighborhoods that do need investment to this day. We'll get into it. I'm really proud of some of the work that we're doing. But first and foremost, when you put up barriers to capital and people don't have the ability to actually go borrow, invest, own, build equity, you are going to have generational problems. And unfortunately, in many of our communities, to this day, they're still segregated.
Thank you. Thank you for that and pulling the thread of the conversation. And now I'll direct the question to Mayor Messam.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Mayor Hill and Mayor Daley. It's great to be with everyone today. I would just say ditto to both of the comments that was mentioned by my colleagues. South Florida, when you look at it as a region, there was redlining taking place in West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami, and Mayor Daley basically hit it on the head. When you look at the impacts of the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the process to qualify for those loans, the actual architects, however, of the redlining were the appraisers who went in, and especially in the Miami area, were able to basically draw lines, and they typically made their neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that were rated A, that had the most loans that were available for it. When you look at the business district that wanted to take over or get most of Overtown, which was predominantly Black neighborhood in the 30s and 40s, and push those residents out without compensation, without anything. And on top of that, to add insult to injury, the rest of the region that was not in these A and B neighborhoods basically could not get loans. And the downstream effect of that means that generations of Black families were not able to build generational wealth. We're not able to form estates and own property. So it just shows that how institutional policies basically were the economic racist weapons that were used to impact prosperity in the Black community. So, in the suburban sprawl here in South Florida and Miramar, we obviously are the residual impacts of those policies. So I'm looking forward to talk about not only of what happened in the past, but what we're doing today to address a lot of the disparities.
Thank you for that. I'm looking forward to that as well. Last year, I actually co-wrote a blog for the National League of Cities titled Embedding Racial Equity in Housing. In this blog, I presented a number of policy recommendations for cities to not only embed, but institutionalize racial equity. Some of those recommendations were conducting a racial impact study, implementing a race-specific and anti-displacement policy, embedding and institutionalizing racial equity into all housing and community development strategies, funding equitable housing development, implementing inclusionary housing policies, as well as developing and supporting and funding shared equity home ownership. With that, I'm interested to learn how each of you are taking steps to address housing inequities found in your community, and how is racial equity embedded as a priority in your plans and strategies. And could you please advance to the next slide? And I'll direct this question first at Mayor Messam.
Well, you know, in the city of Miramar, we've had to become very creative as we are addressing a very serious issue in our city and basically in our county. A couple of years ago, we read an article that said that Miramar was the second least affordable city in all of Florida because we don't have any housing authorities, we don't have housing projects, and most of the housing unit and housing stock is market rate. So we don't have other rental metrics to kind of average out our cost of living here in the city of Miramar. So what we've done is we've created an affordable housing trust where we, during entitlement applications or zoning applications for multifamily developments, developers know in the city of Miramar that they have to provide a certain percentage of workforce and affordable housing in their developments or contribute to our affordable housing trust, which we use those resources to assist in rental assistance or home ownership opportunities for our workforce and then affordability in our community. A second thing I would say is that we are really also being very aggressive in putting in place public-private partnerships where we're leveraging city land and city assets and meeting with developers to see what type of creative development solutions that could incorporate some of the housing challenges that we're experiencing here in the city of Miramar and in South Florida.
Thank you. Next, Mayor Hill.
In the city of Palaca, we started with a ground up approach, and we started out by coming in and doing infrastructure improvements to areas which historically haven't had any. The next step was to start to educate our community as a whole on home ownership. We had about 80% of the folks within our community who were renters. And once we started the home ownership education portions of it, looking at opportunities with partnerships through HUD and Federal Home Loan Bank, we were able to actually start to take folks from being renters and being homeowners. And literally they were finding out that they were paying more as renters than they were as homeowners. The other piece is now we've started investing into neighborhoods. And so, for example, we just introduced a new project, which is coming online now, and that's looking at Central Academy High School, which was one of the first accredited Black high schools in the state of Florida. And this high school had later become Jenkins Middle School. It's now been abandoned by the school district, but the city's looking to adopt it and create a city center of sorts, which becomes a total investment into the community where it's a one-stop shop for services and education. And what that will do is it will allow us to invest into a historically Black community. Our city is roughly 50% Black, but it will also stimulate growth within the community, home ownership. There's about 25 acres that we can use for housing, and there are other opportunities there as well. And so we're looking to have creative ideas and ways in which we can start to build the city up.
Thank you. And Mayor Daley.
Yeah, I've got I got to give both my colleagues kudos for their responses and what they're doing in their municipalities as well, because they're doing great work and we're doing a lot of similar work. But first and foremost, Mayor Hill, you do see Mayor Messam's got his Florida State University football picture right above his shoulder. I wasn't going to bring it up, Wayne, but you're the one that you got it in the shot. So we went to college together and you were fantastic, and it's good serving with you in this capacity. Well, Go Knowles, go Knowles. Look, we're doing a lot of the same things. At City of Tallahassee, affordable housing and inclusionary housing and really moving our community forward is one of our top priorities. I would actually say, Lauren, that everything that comes before the City Commission, this is an angle, this is a lens. We want to make sure that it is a holistic approach to everything we do. We are thinking outside the box. We are working directly with our chambers of commerce and lending institutions to break down the barriers and access to capital. We're getting creative with our policies as well. Probably much like my colleagues, we have a home repair policy with money behind it where people can apply for grants to specifically invest in their houses. We have home ownership grant opportunities as well. We have minority construction loan opportunities in the City of Tallahassee so that we can really, truly invest in our neighborhoods. Mayor Hill, you're absolutely correct. We're doing the same thing. We're going in, we're putting in the infrastructure in our neighborhoods that traditionally, quite honestly, might have been neglected and forgotten for the past, couple of decades or generation or two. We're going in and we are investing in our neighborhoods through what we call our neighborhood first programs. Mayor Messam, I agree 100%. It starts on the ground level. It's working household by household, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, pulling our communities together, talking about how we can move forward together. In Tallahassee, we call that neighborhood first. Our neighborhoods have literally come together to talk about how they want us to assist them in moving forward. Then on the broader scope as well, we've got a very successful inclusionary housing policy in place at the City of Tallahassee. So as we do grow as a community and as we do move forward, that we are bringing everybody that lives in town to the table to have the opportunity to buy and live together. So, I mean, that's just a touch, Lauren. We probably, much like Mayor Hill and Mayor Messam, we can spend an entire presentation alone on many of the things that we're doing. But that's kind of just a broad brush to complement what my colleagues are doing as well.
Thank you. And it's been very rewarding to hear the thread of building coalitions and building partnerships to get this work done. I'm a firm believer that innovation and immediate change happens at the local level, but I'm also a realist. I know to move the needle at the local level, coalitions must be built, not only with residents and community stakeholders like the Chamber of Commerce, but both the state and local level is needed to see systems change. So I would like to know from each one of y'all, what type of support, either on the state or local level, do you think your community needs to appropriately address the effects of housing inequities found in your community? And next slide. And I'll start first with Mayor Hill.
Well, I think the first thing for us in Putnam County is we've got to have our county realize that it's not just a city issue. We're the county seat. And it's a bit polarized here. We're about 15% African-American in the county and about 85% white, and about 80% white in the county. And I think one of the issues is we operate in silos from a local government standpoint. If we were to pool our resources, it would create an opportunity for us to have a greater destination and to really build our community up even more. I think on the state level, there has to be a greater consciousness for the need to raise the floor in order to raise the ceiling. And until we can get our state agencies to understand the importance of affordable housing programs and even the definition of what affordable housing is, there's always going to be issues. And then on the federal level, it's a matter of making sure the resources are getting to the right people. And in many cases in rural communities, I think I'm the only person who's really the only mayor in a rural community on the panel. It's a bit different because the access to capital is far different, and even the way in which the city operates is far different because you're typically trying to rub pennies together to make dollars. And so one of the things that we find is that there has to be a greater reach to the smaller communities. There has to be a greater reach to our municipal partners as well. And I think that it's missed because in so many cases, the federal government tries to rely on the state as the method in which to disperse.
Thank you for that. Mayor Messam?
Yes, I agree totally. I would start at the federal level. We need to have Congress and to work together with our president to actually get an infrastructure bill passed. There is so many opportunities with investing in our infrastructure to be able to go into communities that has either woeful or lack of development. If you can remove the capital costs of putting in sewer, water, roadway systems, it really makes development that much easier. So I think starting with an infrastructure bill that can help all of our communities throughout the state of Florida and this nation, I think will be a great start with the federal government. And here locally in the state of Florida, if we can just get our state house and state senators and our governors to stop sweeping the Sadowski Trust Fund. You know, since the inception of the trust fund, it's been billions of dollars that have been repurposed on every real estate transaction closing in the state of Florida. There are fees that go into the Sadowski Trust Fund that is supposed to address affordable housing. And we collect, I think, over $300 million a year in those doc stamps. And almost every legislative session, about half of it is swept and repurposed for other funding priorities by the state legislature. Can you imagine over $1 billion being applied across our state in Palatka and Tallahassee and Miramar, and partnering with us as local leaders and local communities to be able to solve this housing issue? I think we can start there. But I would also add too that what is also important is that we have to invest in educating our residents, getting them the skills to be gainfully employed, giving them the resources to be producers instead of consumers, where they are creating jobs and creating wealth and creating businesses, because the greater we are in our ability to be self-sufficient, to be gainfully employed, then we can continue to build upon what we've been able to do over the last few decades. So I think just starting there would be a great start federally, statewide, and at the local level.
Thank you. Mayor Daley?
Yes, Lauren, my colleagues said it perfect, and I'm just going to re-emphasize and give them an amen and an amen. You nailed it, gentlemen. The only other thing that I would also add is the fact that we have got to have a state legislature that respects our home rule authority and recognizes the fact that we have 411 municipalities in the state of Florida, and what might be the best program for Palatka might not be the best program for Miramar. And what might be the best program for Tampa might not work in Tallahassee, and that we should have the ability to keep it very flexible, respect home rule authority, so that we can make the decision that's best for us. Mayor Messam, you nailed it. Why have a trust fund if it's going to get raided every single year? If it's not going to be a priority, then don't make it a priority. And I know you two will join me in recognizing Tony Ortiz, the president of Florida League of Cities, that has made the Sadowski Fund one of his top priorities. But, you know, let's call it for what it is. If we're not going to make housing a priority on the state level, don't put the money in there. Otherwise, why do we raid it time and time again? Yeah. And I agree with you, Mayor Hill, that on the federal level, it's important that these programs that have been successful for us remain flexible. When I worked for National League of Cities, my job was to lobby for CDBG funding, for SHIP funding, and make sure that those programs stay flexible for all of us, and to make sure that it flows directly to the municipal governments and that we have access to them. Now, I join y'all in congratulating the federal government with some of the recovery money that's coming through. I know that in Tallahassee in particular, we're spending $9.5 million specifically on housing, not infrastructure, but housing. And Mayor Messam, I agree with you. We got to pass an infrastructure bill. If everyone is looking for the local governments to be the sole source of infrastructure in our country, that's going to be difficult. It's a partnership between the federal, state, and local. So Lauren, in summary, it's about funding, it's about flexibility, it's about respect for home rule authority and allowing us to make the right decisions.
Thank you, Mayor Daley. I appreciate that. So we're going to move to our next portion of the Q&A where we want to hear from the audience. So if you have a question, if you could please drop that in the chat and I can direct the questions to the mayor. And just to emphasize what Mayor Daley said, it's about funding, flexibility, and home rule authority. I think that sums up the presentation, as well as making racial equity a priority and having residents and community stakeholders at the table. Do we have any questions from the audience? I have a question for Michael O'Rourke. He said, it's more so a comment. The recovery money has been designated but made available only to larger communities. Maybe I could direct a question to you, Mayor Hill. With that comment, what do you expect about the money coming from the federal government? What plans do you have for Palatka?
We're sitting in a wait pattern right now. We've got about 4.7 million that's supposedly allocated for us. And he's absolutely right. There has not been an allocation for smaller communities. But I think Mayor Daley hit it right on the head. We're going to look at using money for affordable housing projects. We're going to look at using that money to build the infrastructures up. We've got a unique situation as an older city. We've got infrastructure. We've got water lines that go back to 1883 and sewer lines that are made out of terracotta. And so we find ourselves in a situation where there's been deferred maintenance in communities that need it the most for over almost a century. And we're now replacing and cleaning those systems up. It makes no sense to build a new house and have aging infrastructure in the area. And so I think they all work hand in hand. And as we do that, we also want to make sure we continually educate. And so those are the pieces that we're looking at. We're looking at how we can use the resources really to build people more so than places. And if we can build people, put them in a place where they can live, where they have sustainable wages, and they're educated on what the outcomes can be, and we provide hope. I think more than anything else, those are the things that are going to be best for us, particularly with the money that comes from American Recovery.
Thank you. And I'll direct the same question to you, Mayor Messam.
Yeah, so in the city of Miramar, we're projected to receive about $21 million from the rescue plan. In fact, we didn't wait on the onset of the pandemic. We went ahead and spent money on key areas to ensure that our residents and our business community was able to weather the storm during the pandemic. We see our funding, and we have allocated funding for affordable housing, for rental assistance for our residents, as well as and mortgage payment assistance for our residents, in addition to our small business community. We have so many small businesses in our city that are the lifeline to our community. They're employing our residents. So we could not sit on the sidelines and watch them lose their businesses and close their doors, because when those doors close, there goes the jobs. And when those jobs go, then there's pain for families because they don't have the resources to survive and to eat and to provide for themselves. So being that bridge during this process, as our economy begins to get back on steam and we get back to some form of normalcy, we see that it is very important for us to meet our residents with housing, as well as preserving the housing, as well as the business shelter that our community has.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the conversation and advances, but I would like to thank each of y'all today for the conversation in dropping nuggets of information. And I also want to extend, if y'all ever wanted to share a story with the National League of Cities, I look forward to potentially working with y'all to uplift those stories that need to be heard on the federal level, but also what cities need to know, what innovative work that you're doing, but innovative work through a racial equity lens. So thank you.
Lauren, thank you. And please tell Clarence Anthony that the mayors from Florida say hello. He was a former mayor from the state of Florida as well. Mayor Hill, you're doing a great job as our president, Florida League of Mayors. Mayor Messam, congratulations on All-American City designation. Go Noles, my friend.
Thank you. Go Noles.
And Lauren, thank you as well. And thank you both, mayors.
Thank you. At this time, we'll advance the slide.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for doing an amazing job at facilitating this discussion today. To Mayor Hill, Mayor Daley, and Mayor Messam, truly appreciated all that you guys were able to contribute. It's obvious that you guys are amazing leaders for the state of Florida, and you're doing a great job as it relates to really keeping your pulse on what it takes to continue to build equitable communities within your cities. So again, we just want to encourage you to continue to be who you are, fantastic leaders, and continue to share your knowledge with your peers across the state and also with your peers across the nation with the National League of Cities. I want to give a major shout out to the Florida League of Mayors for having us here today and allowing us to be able to not only help to facilitate a discussion about redlining, but also to pull just one piece from the many training resources that we have within NLC to kind of go through that with all of you as well, as it describes and talks about just the history and the context of redlining as a whole. Again, we do not take it lightly that you guys had the opportunity to bring your mayors together and your staff together as well, and you asked us to be a part of it. We are very humbled by that. I want to give a very shout out to the staff and everyone behind the scenes that we were able to work with the Florida League of Mayors, and truly appreciate again all of you guys just working very closely with us. To the NLC staff, our presenters and facilitators today, Jared and Lauren, thank you so much for developing this training, this session, and this candid conversation. And Melissa, thank you so much for behind the scenes for running the slides. And if you could advance the slide, Melissa. So there is a lot that is happening within the National League of Cities. And what we did today was just a very small, brief snapshot of some of the benefits and the opportunities and resources that we have. If you are interested in learning more about redlining, connecting more with Lauren Lowry, please do not hesitate to contact us at the National League of Cities. If you're interested in learning more about our training opportunities and the technical assistance that we provide and how we work individually with cities in order to advance racial equity on a whole host of different issues, not just redlining, but when we're thinking about economic wealth development and really moving through that national practice that I talked about as it relates to normalizing, organizing, and operationalizing racial equity, we would ask that you please do not hesitate to contact us. If you all could please send any questions, thoughts, comments to our real inbox, which is real@nlc.org. A member of our team will most definitely be able to reach out to you guys as soon as they possibly can in order to connect and continue the work and to support you all in the work that you're doing with your cities. And with that being said, I will then take this moment to say one more really big thank you. Thank you for your time. I know time is a thing that you can't get back. So like I said, we're humbled that you had the opportunity to spend it with us today. And again, if you have any additional questions or would like to reach out, please do not hesitate to contact us at real@nlc.org. Once again, thank you to the Florida League of Mayors, and Mayor Hill, to your leadership as president this year. We just want to tip our hats to you as well, sir. Thank you, everyone.